We're going to discuss The Garden of Eden by Ernest Hemingway. So if you read East of Eden by John Steinbeck, I can tell you that is a wonderful book that we have discussed, but that won't be what we're discussing today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Garden of Eden by the numbers. We're going to move on to Scribner's Defense, which is what I've entitled the portion of this discussion today that will talk about why Scribner's decided to publish what we are looking at, an amalgam of manuscripts. We'll dig into some analysis about the book and the writing technique. If time permits, of course, I will go into the plot, the characters, and hopefully get to the theme of the book as well. So let me just go ahead and pull up. I'm going to go ahead and share screen here a minute and go ahead and start the slideshow. Bear with me. Okay, bye. Okay, let's see. Okay. All right. So I guess the lesson learned from this book is, blame the mother. And please do not burn anything that anyone writes because it really hurts. I'm just kidding. Okay, so getting started. This is the original first edition cover that came out in 1986. That's what you're looking at. We have to consider when we go into this book that we're actually looking at two books. Okay, we will be discussing The Garden of Eden by Ernest Hemingway, but I also feel it is very important to talk about why this book was published and the story behind that. Sometimes it's not a good idea to know about your author. You just want to read the book and be done with it. Case in point, Irene Nemirovsky's Sweet Frances. I love the book. I hated the author. Didn't really need to know about the author in order to enjoy the book. It made it more interesting though. And so I believe that learning about why this was created into a book and published says a lot about Hemingway, and it says a lot about who we are as a culture. The manuscripts for this book lay in a vault for 25 years after Hemingway's death. At least 2 decades prior to the publication, Mary Walsh, his fourth wife, came to Scribner's with shopping bags full of papers and notebooks. This is what ends up coming out of those shopping bags, this book. Hemingway said of his manuscripts, The Garden of Eden, "It is too sexually adventurous to be published." The first run that came out in '86 was a run of 100,000 copies. It was his second posthumously released novel. The other was A Movable Feast. Realize what we have read was printed and published without the author's approval. And we could go down a whole rabbit hole, go set a watchman, about authors having their work published and they did not okay it. He started writing this book in 1946 until 1961. He committed suicide that year. During this time, when this book was being worked on, these manuscripts were being created, he wrote also Old Man in the Sea, Dangerous Summer, Movable Feast, and Islands in the Stream. Originally, there were 48 chapters in this creation, over 200,000 words. 100 pages were typed and 900 were handwritten manuscript-wise. Of the 3 manuscripts, they couldn't be cohesively pieced together because it was repetitious, they were varying lengths, things overlapped, etc. The longest manuscript was chosen for publication, totaling the 30 chapters, 70,000 words. In other words, 2/3 of the manuscripts were left on the editing floor. Many subplots and characters were axed. Had he finished this book, critics say it could have been one of his greatest novels. Why didn't he finish it? Well, we know he took his own life. Here is a man that had several physical injuries. He had a full-blown psychotic paranoid episode near the end of his life. And obviously he passed away, taking his own life. This is a copy of the manuscript that was submitted to the Book of the Month Club. This is back in '86. I thought this was just an interesting image that I found online. I guess they submit the manuscript prior in order for the Book of the Month Club to be way ahead. So when the book comes out, they'll have it already selected and available for purchase. According to Scribner editor Tom Jenks, Garden of Eden, quote, is a departure from the masculine, unquote. Charles Scribner said that they decided to, quote, take a crack at publishing this book. When someone wants to take a crack at something, to me, that means, I don't know how seriously they were taking it, or they didn't, they thought it'd be just a really fun endeavor, but taking a crack sounds like a very odd thing to say. Jenks worked on the novel, creating a novel for 5 months, reducing it to the 48 chapters and cutting out 1/3 of the plot. If you have not yet, please take a moment to mute. Scribner also said there is nothing in the book that isn't Ernest Hemingway. In other words, they did not add anything to it. Jenks also went on to say it is identical to structure, scene by scene. So he feels he stayed true to Hemingway. Now keep that in mind, staying true to Hemingway, because we're going to get to an analysis by our beloved E.L. Doctorow, who has something to say about this book. Many of you may have seen the recent documentary by Ken Burns, PBS, about Ernest Hemingway. If you have, you come to the book with some knowledge about the theme of androgyny and the issues with sexual gender identity, but we will get into that further. But it can't help but influence how you read this book. I purposefully, because I knew the book was coming down the pike, I purposefully did not watch the doc until I had completed the research and the reading. I understand that many of you will have come to the book with the knowledge of the androgyny, etc. I am very glad I waited, read the book cold, and then saw what how Burns treated it. To Burns' credit, and what's not to like about Ken Burns, to his credit, what he does for us is he takes out the surprise that, oh my goodness, this is a man who was dealing with gender issues throughout his life. I would say now it is, it's public knowledge. The criticism that I found about the documentary after watching it was that he puts too much emphasis on the tropes about Hemingway, those of the alcoholism, the fighting, the masculinity, etc. And enough is enough already. He had the opportunity to go. I'm sorry, I just have to mute. I'm getting some feedback. I was saying about about Burns is they play a little too much to the tropes. What was this book? How was it received in '86 when it came out? Let's think about that. Well, if we think about the time period in which he wrote this, 46 to 61, clearly the subject matter would be considered scandalous. However, we fast forward to 1986, and it's considered spicy. It's considered, you know, a book that breaks all the rules. Life magazine, which was still being printed in the 1980s, which it's hard to believe, but it was, said it was a book too hot for the 1950s. Hold on, I've just got to do a little bit of muting here because I'm getting some feedback. This book became a bestseller. Why? We're interested as a culture in sexual experimentation, and it's rather interesting, this bisexual menage a trois. And of course, it's Hemingway, and Hemingway has passed away. It's going to be a bestseller. The book revealed at the time, so we're pre-Ken Burns doc, that there is a far more gentler, I would argue, and androgynous side to Hemingway. Up to this point, no one had any idea about, unless you know, were truly, you know, analyzing his, or had some kind of knowledge of what was going on in Gertrude Stein's salon. Thank God we read that book, because that comes into play. And, you know, how his wives had the short haircuts, etc. We will get to. Critics say that the novel mirrors society's fears and desires regarding marriage and sex and the complicated relationship among lovers. When we have book club, our books are assigned months in advance, which is a blessing and a curse. Sometimes people don't like the book and they make sure to call me or text me or contact me in some way and let me know how much they've hated the book that's coming up that we're going to discuss, which is fine. It does give me a little bit of stress, because I feel bad, you know, that people have, you know, have experienced this frustration. So there are a lot of positives and negatives that I've heard about this book leading up to the book group. Mea culpa, however, this is why we have our book club, our book discussion, because these are books. Sometimes we pick books that we normally would not read if we weren't together as a group. And searching for, chapter endnotes is going on over, you know, 14, I don't know, I can't do math, but it's a long time. We've been meeting since 2007, whatever that is. And we can take chances together on experimental, you know, kind of obscure literature, because we've matured together as a group. And if you're new to the group, you're here for a reason anyway, so you're right there with us. And that's why I feel, whether you loved it or hated it, the discussion has great value, because it reflects our times. Even though, remember, it was written right after the end of World War II, up to 61. Upon publication, this was considered a double sensation, because the editing was an issue and because of the gender. The book, here are some of the reviews. I pulled out some information. There are marvelous passages, dazzling dialogue. I know some of you are probably rolling your eyes, and that's fine. The Africa story works. Readers feel like they are eavesdropping in on a conversation, you know, conversations. People at the time loved the bike riding scenes, people going to and from the bike riding. It's a great book about the writer's craft, and it adds to our knowledge about Ernest Hemingway. Peter Griffin, one of Hemingway's biographers, said there is nothing wrong with publishing and editing a book after someone has, excuse me 1 minute, let me go ahead and, there's nothing wrong with publishing and editing a book after someone, after an author has died. Why? Because there is a role of an editor to be played in the world of publishing. So if you look at it from an editor's point of view and what their job is, if you work at Scribner's and you were given this manuscript by his wife, you have an opportunity to share Hemingway with the world. think about that as we move forward in the morality or the ethics, whichever it is, and I'm sure someone will point out the right word, of publishing a book after an author has passed. I'd love to hear what you have to say about that. The question an editor has to ask is there a story there? And if there's a story there, then the role of the editor must be fulfilled, and he produces that story. My question would be to that editor, how would you feel if you were going for your first job interview, and instead of the person looking at you and seeing what you wore when people used to actually go to interviews, okay, I'm dating myself, what you're wearing, instead he went into your closet and looked at all the clothes all over the floor of what you didn't wear. So who are you? Which one are you presenting? What is your story? Okay, think about that. The book is problematic and controversial. There is an ambitious manuscript, but critics say it is severely truncated and diminished by the editing. And it leaves people thinking what was left out for those who feel that there are serious holes in the book. The answer is, and I touched on this earlier, major character and plot lines are left out, scenes are cut, important themes are cut. Characters aren't fleshed out. For instance, his father, John Boyle, is not, we don't get to know as much of him as we'd like to. It's an unpolished style. There are too many goods, finds, and truths. One sentence, depending on your source, and I believe this is mentioned in Burns, says there's one sentence that contains 11 ands, the word and. Another source saying one sentence contains 15 ands. So we're commenting on the writing style. And enough with the drinking, too much over the top. Again, the trope. Other critics and scholars say it was an absolute mistake to publish this at all. My question to you would be, should it or should it not been published? Better to look at what we've just done and not look at it as a novel and not look at it as a book, but simply something that is an unfinished piece, period. All right. There are a lot of experts on Hemingway out there. I'm going to be just throwing out a few names of some of those scholars who have commented on Eden and tell you a little bit about what they said. Rosemary Burwell argues that Scribner uses an ending that Hemingway never intended. My question to you, did that ending work for you? Robert Fleming says that Scribner's does what every editor is supposed to do, but completely missed Hemingway's intent. Barbara Solomon of the New Republic says, she minces no words, this Barbara. I think she should be in our book club. She says, quote, this book is a travesty, unquote. She also says, quote, it's a literary crime, unquote. Harold Bloom, who to me is kind of like the godfather of Western literature, includes this book in his literary canon. If Harold Bloom blesses it, that's like being, that's like the Pope making, Hemingway a saint. It's not the only Hemingway he includes, but I have such respect for Bloom. I was blown away when I saw it was included. Susan Seitz says that in Garden of Eden, Hemingway is experimenting with style and theme. The editing done by Scribner's suppresses these. He was going in a new direction, but they had poor copyright editing, substantial cut lines, scenes, and chapters ruin it. They added materials. They transposed scenes and dialogue So what we are hearing Catherine and Marita and David say isn't necessarily what Hemingway said they said. And she also says that Hemingway's intentions, the Scribner's Garden of Eden does not represent Hemingway's intentions as he left them. The editing is made to conform with Hemingway's canon. So let me repeat that because that is incredibly important. The editing is made to conform with his canon. The editing does not allow for new developments in style or male and female relationships that he was exploring. He was forging a new direction that is completely swiped clean in the editing. Her conclusion is, until there's a uniform policy that exists on how to treat this work, we will not have a clear vision of the intent. So this blew me away because I thought there is such a legion of Hemingway aficionados out there that she's expecting like a policy to come out, like a vaccine mandate. Like she wants a policy. By the way, I'm getting my booster today. I'm very excited. She wants a policy on how posthumously published works of Hemingway should be treated. That's like the people who don't believe Shakespeare is Shakespeare, which is so cool. They have like their own proclamation, and you can go online and sign it saying William Shakespeare really wasn't William Shakespeare. Okay, let's go to Dr. O. When he reads the book, he does a review for the New York Times. His writing is so delicious. It's like eating flan. Like, I love this guy. This is what he has to say about Garden of Eden. Something exciting is going on here. Despite the Nobel, this writer is still a writer in development. He's actually showing rudimentary signs of a feminist perspective. So if you think that Hemingway has been a woman hater or can't stand the women in his novels, Dr. O's saying, wait a minute, I see something going on here. We see a writer who is learning to dispense judgments a little more thoughtfully. We definitely see signs of recycling material that has been elsewhere. His style, however, traps him. So Dr. O sees Hemingway trying to emerge from his style, but ultimately it's trapping him. And he realized, Dr. O, as he read this book, that here is a writer trying to retool, to push the envelope. And what do we say about authors who we love? And the new book comes out and we don't like it. You know, oh, it's not like that other book we read. What's going on with this author? What's going on here? You know, I recently read the Lincoln Highway by Amor Towles, and I was like, man, you know, what happened? What happened? And that's not fair. It is not fair to an artist. It's not fair to a writer. It's not fair to a painter, a sculptor. But we can't expect artists to, you know, we can't expect the painting to match the sofa, but we do that. And editors make choices based on that judgment too. So he says that readers may not like that this art is changing, but it's the sign of a brave artist. And then he says something I told you to put a pin in earlier about editing. He says you can only cut and edit to affirm strengths. You cannot cut and edit if a writer is developing and he is not there with you, living, breathing aerobic. So no wonder everything is stripped of the development in what we read. No wonder it still sounds like a Hemingway, because that's how we can only go with what we know. We now, speaking as if we were editors, we can only cut with how we know what Hemingway is. We don't know what he wanted. He didn't get a chance to look at the galleys and say, no, X, no. Okay, he also said that Hemingway cured in fiction what he could not solve in real life. Also, he mentioned enough with the drinking. This book can also be seen as a travel guide for yuppies. Circa 1985, I believe his review came out before the book, either 85 or 86, because I have two New York Times book reviews to talk about. But he says Hemingway is such a consumer of, that whole French Riviera thing, that it was a little over the top. And maybe this book was edited to reflect the times of, people traveling and spending, because, we were living in that era with the big shoulder pads, et cetera, money. So this book, the edits reflect that. He also says that he writes as someone who's always has an invisible opponent that he's fighting. Okay, so that's enough on that. I am not going to show you a clip from this film because I like you too much, but feel free to look it up online. You can go to IMDb and you can go ahead and see the clip. The film was released in 2008 in Rome to a limited investor screening. It made the rounds on the festival circuit. It appeared in the UK, and they described it as a boundary-breaking erotic drama. And 2010, it went on general release, and you can go ahead and have at it. You can download it on iTunes, and good luck, darling. I want to talk about now his writing technique and the theory of omission. If you were with us when we read For Whom the Bell Tolls, we talked a lot about his writing style, so I'm not going to go too far into that. If someone, thank you for whoever just muted, thank you. But I will talk to you about the theory of omission. This guy is a trained newspaper journalist, and I actually have all my little books here from my newspaper day. Have my AP style book from before the internet. And if I had to sum up the whole thing, I won't bring out all my other editing books, but I've got the Chicago Manual of Style. I've got the, the Careful Writer. I've got all these important things about writing. In newspaper journalism, you keep it simple. And I was told to write to a 6th grade level, no higher. That has its pros and cons. And today I would say it was probably at a preschool level, but whatever. You've got to be clear. You've got to get to the point. He worked for the Kansas City Star. If you haven't seen the PBS series, they do a great job on the whole bio. You keep it very brief. The more adjectives you use, the less of a journalist you are. Right. So he has sparse, understated prose, closer to poetry, some people say. He deliberately omits things. He makes the reader feel more than can be understood. He's oblique. He's not going to tell you everything. The dialogue is what reveals what's going on. And I love the quote here. An editor once asked Ernest Hemingway how long it would take him to finish a paragraph. Hemingway pointed to the bottle of whiskey on the desk and said about an inch or two. That pretty sums it up. We have no editor. I mean, no narrator. He does not tell you anything. He shows you everything in this book. And I would argue in For Whom the Bell Tolls as well. There is an ambient bubbling of anger and rage that is right below the surface. I feel like when we read this book, we were just making sure that no one blew. What were the influences that brought us to this book? This is what I found so incredibly interesting. We know that he's a big fan of Twain, and Huck Finn really is the only book you ever need to read, but he was also influenced by anyone who walked into Gertrude Stein and Alice B. Tolka's home. including Pond. He also loved Flaubert, Stendhal, which we've yet to read, and Gertrude Stein herself. I could list a paragraph this big of all the influences in his life. Let's just say from Bach to Zola, this man, he's a smart guy, and it shows in the work. But I do want to talk to you about the drawing on the left of your screen, and forgive my French. Here is an image of Mademoiselle du Maupin. You'll notice she's in her pantaloons. Our book that we read, the scholars say that this is not new. Well, clearly we know none of this is new. It goes back to the Garden of Eden. But I want to talk now, I want to take you back now to the 1800s, 1834 in particular. Themes of decadent androgyny and sexual role reversal from the French, especially from the French 1834 novel entitled Madame du Maupin. This particular book was said to have influenced the book that we read. So what is this book about? All right. Mademoiselle du Maupin was published in 1834 or 35, depending on your source. The author, whose last name is Gautier, was solicited to write a historical romance based on the life of French opera star Mademoiselle Maupin, who was a first-rate swordswoman and often went disguised as a man. Originally, his story was to be about her, and more of a biography. She set fire to a convent for the love of another woman, but she later retired to a convent herself shortly before she died in her 30s. But Gautier instead turned the plot into a simple love triangle between a man, Delbert, and his mistress, Rosette, who both fall in love with Madeleine de Maupin, who is disguised as a man named Theodore. Scholars argue that Hemingway was familiar with this novel. I wouldn't be surprised. Think about the picture you see here in the middle, life as an expat, left bank expat in Gertrude Stein's salon. And you can't get any more rich with the culture. And if you're new to the group and you have not yet read the autobiography of Alice B. Toklas, I highly recommend that. I also recommend Shakespeare and Company by Sylvia Beach. That will give you all you need to know. Forget the Woody Allen movie, although it is very pretty and I love the clothes. But these two sources will really give you a great feel for what it was like to grow up to live Hemingway's life as an expat in Paris. So this left bank lesbian world, androgynous world, rich in culture, art, literature, experimentation. This is where he is, all this creative energy is just sparking and flying everywhere. And there is also another influence to think about, and that is literature and this whole idea of sex and gender identity and androgyny in the 1920s. Think about who's coming on the scene. Freud. Freud is gaining a lot of influence. So there's that whole element too of this new psychological science that is becoming known. And if you remember back to Sherwood Anderson's book, Winesburg, Ohio, you'll remember, my brain is so meshed right now. I can't remember whether I discussed this with literature at the Comer or with our group, but anyway, I'm sure someone will let me know. But Sherwood Anderson kind of gave Hemingway his calling card when Hemingway went to Paris so he could get into Gertrude's salon. And he was a great influence on Hemingway before Hemingway tore him to shreds. He tended to chew out spit out all his friends after he got tired of them. But Sherwood Anderson wrote a book called The Man Who Became a Woman. I have not read T.S. Eliot nor Ezra Pound, but I understand that their works have a lot about or references to androgyny as well. In the original manuscript, which we do not have access to, although the John F. Kennedy Library, I believe, does have the original manuscripts that can be seen if you go digging. There was a reference to a Rodin sculpture that is referred to as, you know, an androgynous sculpture, and that is a reference, either a motif or a theme or whatever, a symbol in the book, and it was cut out of the Scribner edition that we read. Another biographer argues that Ernest Hemingway's anxious and insecurity about his own identity was masked with this macho, flamboyant myth that he puts out to the world. So here's the question, right? Who was Hemingway? Who was this man? Was he bisexual? Was he not bisexual? Was he gay? But the question, that question, which probably is better suited for 10, 15 years ago, I think more the elephant in the room is, what is gender? And why do we even have to label it anymore? And why are we at a point in our culture maturity where it's a common to discussion? You know, like, and how does this affect his writing really? And how does it affect you as the reader? Like, do you have to now go back and read everything? Do you not give a flying whatever? Like, what do we do with this? Because this novel is a novel that is struggling with this temptation, with this enlightenment, with this loss of innocence. What happens in the Garden of Eden? All these things happen. There's just so much to unpack here. So the question is, why is Ernest Hemingway's work so purposefully hypermasculine? The biographer Kenneth Lynn does delve in and try to answer this. And Lynn actually debunks, as well as Burns did too, a wee bit, most of Hemingway's war exploits and the stories that he talks about in Movable Feats, where he chews up and spits out the rest of his friends. And it does seem that the Burns documentary relies heavily on the Lynn biography, talking about how really Hemingway didn't do a lot of the things he did. He created his own social media profile, you know. People close to Ernest Hemingway always suspected that he was homosexual. Gertrude Stein referred to him as, quote, yellow, which evidently back then meant you were a homosexual. There are two other sources that say upon meeting Hemingway, it was perfectly clear that this man was gay. There is also an episode of Hemingway. I don't know if it's Doctorow who does this or Burns, so excuse my memory, but Hemingway catches some huge fish, a huge marlin, when he's in Key West, and it's quite a catch and very impressive. And I guess they hang him to dry or whatever once they catch them for a while. So he's drinking, you know, a night of revelry at Sloppy Joe's, and he walks down to the end of the dock, and someone actually sees him punching the fish. Like, he can't ever be masculine enough. So it's the middle of the night, he's drunk, and there he is, like it's a boxing match. So Lynn argues that now Hemingway's novels contain all similar themes of transsexual fluidity and fantasies, a lot of twinning, brother and sister incestuous overtones, his longing to be like a woman, and reversal of coital positions. According to Gertrude Stein, she says that Hemingway said that he looked like her mother, his mother, and that he was wanted to sleep with her. So that's a whole lot going on, but I just wanted to get that out there as well. So finally, we get to our book. I know, Gail, you're laughing at me. I talk a lot, I know. Okay, but I'm almost done, I promise. Okay, so let's just talk about the book a minute. Here's a great photo I found of Paulette Kiefer and Ernest Hemingway on the French Riviera on their honeymoon, which mirrors our Catherine and David in the book. You'll notice the haircuts. So what is the book about? What is the takeaway? We have 5 months in the lives of David Bourne and Catherine. David Bourne, someone who was born. You probably well know that Hemingway was first married to Hadley Richardson. He ends up having an affair with Paulette, who first moves in with them. And, you know, we see Hadley with short hair. We see Paulette with the short hair. Both Hadley and Hemingway referred to Paulette, the second wife, as the heiress. So there, obviously, there's a lot of parallels. We have two very strong characters in our novel. We have Catherine, who is obsessed with darkness. The example of her suntan in contrast to that platinum hair. It would be argued that Hemingway's concern with evil human flaws and the dark side of humans, this is reflected in Catherine. And I can't help but remember our Catherine from East of Eden, who was the evil incarnate. So we have to think, why is Catherine jealous? Who is Catherine? She is nothing like any other character that Hemingway had ever created. And who is David Bourne? This is not the macho man. He's not shooting anything. We have the whole Africa story to show a completely different side of David, or dare I say, Ernest. Is he the original man, David Bourne? Passive, a writer devoted to his craft? Well, he's certainly always drunk. Does he share responsibility with with what his wife wants to do? Is his wife mad? Is that just a sign of the times when she's referred to as mad? Or is he a sensitive husband who understands he's dealing with a woman who has a mental illness? And what of Marita? Is she just some disgusting, sappy kind of ditz? Or is she an important part of this love trifecta? I could go on and on about the titles, about the the biblical references, psychosis, androgyny, but I want to now open it up to you. Of course, we have to talk about the whole blaming the mother, because that's important. But I think what I'm going to ask you to do is to go ahead and I'm going to go to the chat a second here, just go ahead and let me know if you'd like to add anything, and I'll take it off screen so I can see everyone, but I just wanted you to see a picture of the wives. Of course, only Gilhorn, the reporter, does not cut her hair. The other 4 wives obviously do. I just thought that picture was kind of interesting.